Well, I think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade marks not only the end of abortion in many American states, but the end of Ukraine. With Roe v. Wade and abortion now at the top of the news cycle, I think that Ukraine is going to have a real tough time staying on the front page of American newspapers. Even Western governments outside of the U.S., France and the U.K., and I think even Germany, all came out and wanted to talk about Roe v. Wade yesterday. And I don't think that it's a controversial statement to say that the bandwidth for public outrage in the West is quite limited. And the more people are upset about Roe v. Wade and the threat to abortion, the more that people are upset that baby children might have a chance at living, the less upset they're going to be about what the Ruskies are up to in Ukraine. This comes as the Ruskies are closing in on Kharkov, which is a major city in, I guess you'd say, northeast, north and east Ukraine. It's actually quite close to the Russian border, but further west of Donbass. It looks as though the Ruskies are going to move in and take Kharkov before they take Odessa. I think by the end of this, what we will see in Ukraine will look a lot. Actually, you know what? I'll put the map up. The picture that I'll have up for this video will be the map that I'm about to reference, and it is this map from back in 2014 that was put out by some pro-Russian guy, I think, in Ukraine, or at least people who are on Russia's side. And it showed a partition plan for Ukraine. You had West Ukraine labeled New Landistan after Victoria Nuland, the patron of the Euromaidan government, and the eastern half was labeled Novorossiya, controlled by Russia. The dividing line here being the Dnieper River. And under this map, the Ruskies would control the entire Black Sea coast of Ukraine, and they would extend their territory all the way to Transnistria, bordering Moldova. I think that this is even more likely now that Ukraine and Moldova have been made candidates for EU membership. The Ruskies would see this, I think, as a direct threat to Transnistria, which is, I believe, a majority Russian breakaway region of Moldova. I think it's on the other side of a mountain range is kind of how it works. It's on the Ukrainian side of these mountains that are in Moldova. Moldova historically was a ethnically Romanian region that was under Russian rather than Turkish influence. Romania proper, the country of Romania as we know it today, historically was ruled by the Ottomans and their vassals. And what we today call Moldova was a region known as Bessarabia, which at varying times, I think the Ottomans controlled it sometimes, but it was often contested by the Ruskies. And Transnistria is this little sliver of a region that has been self-governing since the end of the Soviet Union. They still fly the Soviet flag there. They, I guess, call themselves well, they don't call themselves a Soviet Socialist Republic, but as close as you can get. They're not up with this whole end of the Soviet Union thing. They didn't go along with that. And the Ruskies are kind of obligated to protect them. And so it is pretty certain, at least to me, it has been for quite a while, but this EU candidacy is going to make it a real certainty that the Ruskies will push their border up to Transnistria, and I guess at some point probably annex Transnistria as part of Russia. But all that would come after, they take Odessa, and it doesn't look like they're going to be doing that before Kharkov. I wasn't sure exactly what their intentions were for Kharkov. I mean, in the back of my head, I have the whole time assumed that the Ruskies would try and take Kharkov. After all, it was originally the capital of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic before it was expanded multiple times and the capital was moved to Kiev. Kharkov was considered to be a Russian city for most of its history until, I think, fairly recently. And so, like Odessa, I just assumed that it would be something that that Putin would want to have since he's already come this far. But we hadn't seen any real concrete efforts being put into it. Now, though, it looks like it is starting to become the focus. We're seeing a lot more military activity there. Patrick Lancaster, who is an on-the-ground reporter, an English-speaking reporter who has been on the ground everywhere that the Ruskies have been fighting, he certainly thinks, based on his actions, that there's going to be a lot more activity there because he just arrived there 2 days ago in Kharkov Oblast. And so Kharkov might become the next Mariupol, though much less fortified. Mariupol had been a contested city back in the 2014 war, and the Azov folks, they were founded there, and they had really dug in over the last 8 years. In Kharkov, I don't think that there is nearly as much preparation for war that has gone on over the past 8 years. And so I don't know if it will hold out. Well, I think it almost certainly won't hold out as long as Mariupol did. I think it'll probably be less of a fight than that, but that doesn't mean that this is going to be easy or bloodless or anything like that. Whatever ends up happening, though, I don't think that it will get nearly as much coverage in Western media as we're used to. As the Ukraine war drags on, it becomes more and more a negative issue for the establishment and more a positive issue for the anti-establishment folks, the people who don't want to participate in the war in Ukraine, the people who don't want to fund it, the people who say it's a lost cause, the people who say this really is a massive quagmire mess that we don't want to get involved in. And considering how many billions and billions of dollars the U.S. alone has put into the Ukrainian war effort, and all of the very dangerous weapons that we've sent over there, which are finding their way onto the black market, I think that increasingly the American establishment will want to ignore Ukraine and forget about it, just the same way that they don't talk about Afghanistan. Actually, they didn't talk about Afghanistan really for 20 years. They talked about Afghanistan very briefly after that war began, and then they sort of carried it on in silence for a couple of decades. And then, certainly since the pullout from Afghanistan and the whole collapse and everything, we don't talk about what goes on there anymore. We don't talk about the earthquake where 1,000 people died. We don't talk about the famine, the total economic collapse that came as a result, partially, of America's seizing their foreign exchange assets, the reserves of the central bank. There's been endless pain and suffering in Afghanistan the whole time that the U.S. was there, and increasingly since the U.S. left. But we don't talk about that. The reason why we talk about the war, the suffering, the pain in Ukraine is because it was useful to people in power, to people who wanted to sell weapons for a time. And I think that time is waning rapidly. I think that the Europeans will be a little more stubborn, one, because Roe v. Wade is going to be less important to European countries, although apparently it has some importance to them since they feel the need to come out and condemn it and talk about Roe v. Wade. But it's still going to have less of an impact on their country because it's a ruling in the United States. Literally does not affect their government at all. And so they will still have some bandwidth to allocate to Ukraine virtue signaling. But they really need Washington on board. They need Washington to drive this whole situation. And so I will say at this point, I think we've reached peak Ukraine. I think that, the pro-Ukrainian sentiment has reached critical mass. and it's going to melt down. I think the media will get a lot more traction out of trying to talk about how Republicans want to take away your abortion rights than talking about Ukraine, especially when they're talking about Ukraine losing and the Ruskies winning, when we were all told by the media that the opposite was true, that the Ukrainians were going to be marching to Moscow tomorrow. All those lies can no longer be maintained. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.